Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are and what time zone you're in. This is David Singleton. I'm here to moderate today's session, which will be presented by Luc, who obviously everybody knows as the organizer and manager of Areopa. Luc, I'm sure everybody realizes, is the #1 expert these days on BC testing and how to test your code to make sure it's correct. But today we're going to talk about verifying and debugging your actual test. So testing the tests, I guess, is this what this is, or is this debugging the testing the debugging? It's going to be a good one anyway. So it'll be an interesting one. I have a little new Navision or BC developer here, my little daughter. She's just turned 3 months old, and she might be a little bit grumpy and might sort of make a little bit of her noises, so don't worry about that too much. Anyway, let's move on. Next. Right, so everyone knows your mics are muted so that we won't have any sound. If you have any questions, the most important thing, punch the questions into the question window. If it's a question that I feel needs an answer immediately, I'll interrupt Luc and have him answer the question straight away so that you can get that answer relevant. If it's an answer that I feel is better left to the Q&A, then I'll leave that at the end and we'll go through the Q&A at the very end, okay? So, everybody knows about Areopa, I hope. Please make sure to log on the site and subscribe. It's really important that we get subscribers because the way YouTube works, this information won't get shared out there. People won't see it. It's all free. The best thing we can do is have support by people watching the video. So please, if you watch the video, press the like and the subscribe because it really does help us a lot. Thank you. There's a newsletter. If you want to be automatically updated, you won't get heavy spammed. You'll get an email once a month with the details of the next events. Just go to this. You can just rewind this later to see this and log up to the newsletters. Okay, so on Areopa Academy, which should be an easy one to find, you'll have all of our next seminars. So we have Stephen Renders, and I think Stephen is pretty popular when his sessions go great. If you've got anything about BI, you want to see this session. He takes a topic and gets it in a way where you can actually start making things happen. Andre, I've never seen any of Andre, so I can't tell you anything about it. But the Dataverse really is where we're heading with how we track all of our contacts and our information. So this is going to be a pretty important session to have a look at. And everybody, I'm sure, knows Christoph. He'll be doing the release of Power of Assisted. Sorry.
Try it again.
The releasing the power of assisted setup. So it's actually pretty good. I wish he was doing it early because I'm actually going to be doing using assisted setup this weekend, and I would love to see that session before then. Unfortunately, I'm going to miss it, but definitely that will be worthwhile. Now, you can see we're doing a session every 2 weeks, roughly the 9th and the 23rd of every month. If you've got something, come on. And we really want to encourage first-timers. The thing about this is there's not 2,000 people out there watching. You have a nice audience. It's a good way to get yourself known out there. It's a good way to have a practice run. And if you mess up a little bit, no one's going to worry because we expect that. So if you are new, if you've never done a webinar, you've never presented in front of an audience, contact us. We'll help you getting through it. And really, this is a great way to get that first foot in the door. Right? Our sponsor is 4Nav. It's really important because we do have hosting costs. We have the time that needs to put in. 4Nav provide all the services and all the background that we need to make this all happen. And I'm sure everyone knows 4Nav reports because they're basically Navision classic reports in BC, but far, far better. So just remember our sponsor, that 4Nav are making this possible. So I'm going to hand it over to Luc. And Luc, it's all yours. Anyone has any questions, please put them in the question window. Luc, over to you.
Hey, thank you very much, David. I'm glad to have you on every time again, giving me the room to present in this case. Yes, welcome everybody. Today it's about verifying and debugging tests. And yes, as I put it in the book, it's actually in a different way said testing your tests. before I go into, for those who maybe are new, I'm not that new around here. This is a bit of my professional and partly private history. My background in testing comes from my period at Microsoft as a software development engineer. Of course, you might know that I've wrote this book, and finally Pact seems to be in getting in shape to let me get to work on a second edition to sync it with BC as it is right now, where a lot of things in the book, as it was on BC 14, are still related to C-side, where, well, nowadays most of us are getting into real AL. If you want to contact me, feel free. Yes, this is my company mail, but there's also Luc van Vugt at areopa.academy. If you have questions and we did not get to that today, or it didn't pop up in your mind, feel free to come up later with that. Roughly 2 topics, debug your tests and validate your tests, or verify your tests. That's the 2 things what I'm going to do. This session, let's say I planned this session partly as a promise to the people that were following my online test automation course the previous 2 weeks, and this was part of the program, and not everything went well. There was something going differently than I had thought, and I hadn't fully checked before the session, so I promised to the whole group I'm going to do this as an Areopa webinar, which gives also access to all you out here and or in here, and people out there that will probably also watch it on YouTube. Of course, like David said, feel free to step in with questions. Before I'm going into debugging and validating, a short introduction, because I'm going to use a case, let's call it a business case, called extended text on assembly documents. It's actually an example, one of the 3 examples I did put on my GitHub repository called test automation examples. And let me give a short introduction on this, because that's where I'm going to use some tests from. In this GitHub repository, there are a number of, well, let's maybe bring this a bit better in view. There are 3 issues that describe the exact, well, in short, the functionality. And here I made a reference to Archerpoint blog post, where they have a nice, a nice elaborative description of what extended text on documents is, and standard BC has implemented it on purchase, sales, and service documents. And I built this example how you could do this on assembly documents, and straight I would have an application or a feature that allowed me to write tests. The code, just to make this story complete, you will find in the VS Code folder here, where I have an app and a test app, and the test app contains altogether 72 tests. I will not go through all of them, but feel free to go here and make use of that. It's open source, so it's yours too. In short, if you know the functionality on sales and purchase and service documents, if you have an item or a resource or even a GL account, but in this case for assembly documents it doesn't make sense to have GL accounts, you can add to items and resource and GL accounts extended text. As soon, for example, you can set up the system that as soon as you add an item, you fill in an item number in the number field on a sales document, it adds extra lines of text as a description. That's actually in short a feature, and in this case it's been implemented on the assembly documents. As you saw already on the side, I provided flowcharts, actually 4 of them, with the different possibilities that if you have an item and add that to a assembly document, and it could be quote blanket assembly order or an order. If you add an item to it, you can set up an item that has extended text and that it automatically will add the extended text to the document. So there is a field called automatic extended text, and if the item has extended text, it will add it to it. And this is a scenario where you don't have it turned on, the automatic extended text, and then it can only be added manually. And the same applies for resources. So for the requirements, you could say on the description on GitHub, there are 4 flowcharts. So in a nutshell, this is the business case, yes, and everything has been built functionally as the app, as I call it, but also test-wise as the test app. And we'll go into some code and have a look at it. Contrary to the course, or reverse-wise to the course, I'll dive into debugging, where in the course I would start with validating the test, but I decided to do it the other way around. Let's go and have a look at how to debug tests. During the course, the last one too, very often the question is, can you debug tests? Yes, you can. It's AL code, so you can debug it. There's nothing different from that. So let's pick a scenario. In this case, one of the tests that fails. By the way, to be honest, I changed something in the app code, so this would fail. Yeah, and now as you can see, this is a screenshot from the AL test tool, which resides now in my environment. And I can run tests from there. This is not about how to run tests, so I'm not going to explicitly explain the test tool, or that you could run the test using the AL test runner extension on VS Code, or that you write PowerShell script using, for example, BC Container Helper, which has a run test commandlet too. It's now just about debugging the test. So I will be using the AL test tool, and it should open up the right page right now. Might take a little bit, sometimes it's fast, sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but it should open up the page and show me the test tool with the erroring test. As you can see in the error message, by the way, the AL test tool stores in the error message box field both the error message and the call stack, as you can see. Yeah. So if I click on it, you get it in a separate screen. You get the error message, you would copy and paste this, and you get the call stack. If you're a user of the test tool, which is actually the CAL test tool, it's literally called in the background CAL test tool, which resides in the Cronus database since NAV 2016. You will only have an error here, and if you zoom in or click on it, it zooms into the history. So the AL test tool does not hold history anymore, and that's because of, well, you only should run the test and collect the results, for example, in Azure DevOps. And with the CAL test tool, if you zoom into the history and there are errors there, then you can there on that separate or zoomed in page open the call stack. I'm mentioning this just to explain it if you have never had an explicit look at it, next to the fact that the call stack will be, let's say, part of a focus of today. So this test has already ran, and I prepared it, and I could run it again, and if everything is still the same, it should still fail. What's the case? This test, a short description, and I'll go into the detail, but this test creates an assembly order, actually creates an item with extended test, creates an assembly order, actually only the header, then it creates a line with that item on it, and the item is set in such a way that as soon as you add the item to the line, the text, extended text, is automatically added to that line as, let's say, text lines. Yeah. Apparently something fails. Expected 1, actually 0. what? The number of text lines. I did see a failure or an error here that I did add a point, a dot at the end, which shouldn't be there. There are 2 at the moment, but so it doesn't say that this is not 3 dots, that it's breaking the line, but it's just dot too much. The number of text lines, apparently expect 1 and there is only 0. So while the item should have extended text, and I will go debugging with you and show you that it does, that line has not been added to the assembly order. Yeah. So let's get back to the slides. So let's have a look at this specific test. 1 out of the 72. I'll use another one later, but I'm not going to discuss everything. But those who have been in my course, those who have been reading my book, know that I'll explicitly, let's say, introduce a structure that allows us to, every time again, anybody who gets into this test to debug it, to understand it. As you can see, there are green parts, comment lines, and there are black parts, the real code. This scenario, add to assembly order, actually align line for item with automatic extended text enabled and extended text enabled. So it has this property set and it has extended text added to the item. Yes, it's a long line. On the other end, there are some words failing if it would be a real, let's say, normal day life English sentence. My goal is always with a scenario to describe it as short as possible, but as complete as possible. I'm not saying I'm always succeeding well, but as you can see, that ends up to be also the name of my test function. Yeah, so I want it to be readable in every aspect. So let's have a look and fill in. Apparently it needs an item with automatic extended text enabled and extended text enabled for the ensemble order, so that it has extended text and it's also set that it's allowed to be added to assembly order. Those who know the extended text functionality know that with each text you can, let's say, point out on what kind of document it can be applied or used. Yeah. So the given is a functional description. It's not technical, it's a functional part. This is a functional scenario which says I need some data. I need also to have an assembly order. In this case, an order without lines, so let's say an header only. And once we have that, the action is to add an item line, so that on that line, in the number, you fill in the item number. If you go out of the field, it will be validated, and through the validation, it will trigger the functionality to get that extended text and add it to the line. Yeah. And eventually, I need to verify that the expected extended text line, which has been, let's say, linked to the item here, is to be found on the assembly order. Apparently, it doesn't find that line. It expects one line. This one creates one extended text line, and it's not to be found there. Yeah. So item is created. So we'll go and debug and see if all this is really happening. Extended text is related to that item or linked to that item. Assembly order is created, and an assembly order line with item, and then the effect should be that an extended text line is also created. All right, let me demo this and step through it. And I'll show you, let's say, in a simple way, the debugging, of course, and on the other hand, also the fact that I want to be more in control of what I'm looking at. This is a bit vague maybe, but that's what it is at the moment. Let's start a debug session on this environment. And then it should open up the test tool with this test suite also, and with only one test in it. It's just to focus easily. By the way, test suite in the test tool is, let's say, call it a batch, like in a journal. You can put a zillion number of test code units with test in it. I also use test suite as the collection name of a test code unit. In a test code unit, you could have a number of tests that do test a feature, a small functionality, and that's a small suite that tests that functionality. So those, let's say, in those two situations, suite has or suite has a little bit different well, connotation or context. So if I'm going to run this test, and for those who haven't used this tool, you can use run test and then say if the line is selected, do I want to run the line? The code unit is part of, or everything if there's more. But you can also use run selected test, and I use that often because that makes more sense. It doesn't pop up with a dialog here. However, let me just bring in my taskbar. You can see that now Visual Studio code is popping up, but I'll keep it on the left because sometimes with the slides I don't see the clock anymore, and then I cannot give focus on or keep an eye on the time. So I'm here in this scenario. You might recognize it's scenario 0002, and you might recognize some other things that I did put on the slide. So let me get a little bit more real estate here. So we're at this point that is going to create an item. Yeah. Of course, I could get in like in any test, and yes, you might not have seen it. I didn't point out, but what you see is that I have two arguments here, and both of them are actually functions as let's say a workaround for macro values. I don't want to have a true or a 1 as parameters. I want my code at that level to be readable, to read out loud. I'm not going to say this is the best practice in the sense that you should also adapt to that, but this gives more create item with extended test, enable automatic tests, extended tests, enable extended tests for assembly order. It's clear what this is going to do. Yeah. Although with debugging, it steps into that function and out, and now I'm getting really into this create item with extended test function. By the way, this whole project is ready, so I have generalized code into libraries. In the course, I'll discuss that when I have one test code unit, I'm not going to create any library. If I get a second test code unit, that's the first situation where I could consider to go and get shared code into libraries. This project is already ready, although we have an error at the moment, so I can step into this function. And as you can see, maybe let's zoom in a little bit, I love to call and make use of standard libraries. There is a library inventory which has various functions around to create items, and I'm calling on create item. We could step into this, and let's do it for now. This is the code there, but let's step out of it. It's not about getting into every code aspect, is just about debugging. So I can run step by step through this, as you can see. Do I have an item yet? No, well, I stepped out, so this item should be filled. So you can see the number is GL000, and it has a base unit of measure, it has etc, etc. One thing that strikes your eye maybe is that it has a number which does not relate to any number series in Cronus. And with many of the master data, the library functions do use number series that's created through the libraries. Yeah, and it starts with GL or GU. GL for global, or GU for what is it called? Something like a GUID kind of thing. The advantage is that you immediately can see this was created by a test. Yeah, by a test library in the end, of course. So I can instantly recognize that indeed this is a newly created item. Yeah, and when the item is created, the automatic extended text field is set to true. This parameter was handed off from the code, and wait, why? Yeah, true. I was wondering why the hover over wasn't showing. So this field is set to true. We have a modify and an extended text is created. And yes, we could go in and see that extended text is created. Well, to debug, and yes, using the debugger pane and putting watches on it, we could follow it. And that's surely a viable scenario way of doing. However, in general, yes, when I first need to debug, just there's an arrow, go in and debug, I will put watches there. But overall, this is not really going to help me a lot. It's not, there's a, for me, in my opinion, I want to show you a better way to do that. However, let's put some watches on it. So for example, the item number here, I can put a watch on that and see that it's this one. I could put a watch on automatic, for example, this parameter, etc., etc. Well, let's move on for the moment and get out. And of course, you will see that this gets out of scope. And that's one of the things, of course, if I have a variable or a parameter by reference, you can start at the top and it continues because it's a pointer. If you go into the functions, it shows you still the value, the value of it. But it's one of the things that shows the weakness also of it. If you don't have it straight in place, there's, in my opinion, a better way of doing. So what I do is, let's just run the whole test and let's start the debugging again. Here is where we go and get into the error, as you can see, and the expected value is 1 and the actual value is 0. By the way, this is a function, r equal, part of the assert, in this case assert code unit. There is a newer one. Microsoft is over time abstracting things from their old libraries into newer ones. There is also a library assert which has similar functionality, but it has all kind of things like is true, is false, are equal, and I would like to urge you to use them instead of creating your own checking functions. Like in the end, it's throwing up an error, which you would probably also do, but it has standard formatted messages, which allows you to better understand what the error is. Yeah, let's just continue and rerun. What is my extra thing I'm putting onto the arena to help me to get things debugged better? And that's SQL queries. With SQL queries, I have much more power in following what is happening. I can have this query with all the columns on it. Well, that's what I'm going to show you. I already have opened SQL Management Studio, SQL Server Management Studio, and I'm going to start like I would start with it, but I already prepared a couple of things, of course, to make it a bit more efficient. So let's go into the client here. Let's run it. Let's get to the debugger. Here's where it stops. So here's going to create an item. Well, if in SQL Server Management Studio, I could do it also, of course, in Visual Studio Code. The advantage here is that I easily can do a select, select top 1000, and I can see, yes, in the database I have a whole bunch of items, of course, Cronus items. Yes, let's step over this one. So the item should be created, and if I run the query right now, there should be a new item created. However, hey, why doesn't it show? Because I'm running the test tool. I hope it shows right. You can see at the bottom, it uses a test runner with test isolation code unit, which means in the end, it does not stick in the database. But I could set this property and show me, if I run it again, let's stop it, that I do have an item with that GL00 whatever. It should pop up somewhere here. Yes, it does. Here, you see? Let's put a filter on it. So where number here, like this GL percentage. If we rerun it, that's the only thing in focus. I now have as full view, well, a full view, of course, I need to scroll if I want to, but I can put any column in view here by moving it up or whatever, yeah, so, or remove things, and I can refresh it every time. I don't need, in the debugger, I have a restricted view. It can fit, but this gives me more power, and I'll show you a little bit more. Well, actually, as I said, going to close this, I did prepare a number of SQL scripts already before this session. Here I have them, and this is what I typically also do when I'm working on tests. I need to fix things. I'm going to save my queries, and I can open them and run them. Yeah, so my item query, I have 7 queries, and now, no, they're all in view. That's funny. Previously, that was when preparing not everything in view. So items, I have this item, yeah, and on that, for that item, extended text has been created, as you can see, yeah, and I have also an extension on the extended header, text header, to allow people to click to turn on whether it's applicable to assembly quote, assembly blanket order, or assembly order. Yeah, and yes, it has an extended text line, as you can see. For this one, I could set a filter also so that it's only showing up, but then you can see there is also other data. Yeah, so I know I can see an item has been created. Yeah, is there an assembly order in the system already? No. And this might be a daring one because let's say the system not always flushes things straight away to the database. So running the query might sometimes show, and that was typically happening in the course, and there was a lot of data not showing where it should be showing up. There's also a bit of patience, but it's not always straight away syncing. So it might not always show up. However, in many cases that. I have now created assembly order. Let's hope it shows up. It did this morning. And you see, apparently there's something not in sync at the moment. So the assembly header is not showing up, although it sometimes does, sometimes don't. So there's a weak point in, let's say, my demo here, in my pledge for using SQL queries. Now it's going to do the action. It's going to add that item, that what has been created, to the assembly order line. Yeah, and I need to use, as you can see, the word page. So let's go into this. I need to use a page because the functionality of triggering that extended text to be added to the assembly order is actually programmed on the page. I did program it exactly like that because it's also on the purchase, so on the purchase, for example, order subpage implemented. So I need to have a page to trigger that. It's not stored on the table, it's stored, that code is stored on the page. Maybe not the best practice in my humble opinion, but that's the way it was implemented on the other documents, and I did it exactly the same here. So I'm going to step in here, or step over. Let's do a step over. Let's step out. So it should now have created that assembly order line here. And if I run this query, that shows up. We could refresh this and see, oh sorry, the assembly header. Now it shows up. So you know that the service tier caches things, and for example, inserts are cached and only sent to the SQL server if it needs to. Yeah. Apparently, I have a line which is now an item line. Hey, but indeed, I can see there is not a text line added. So indeed, that's why my test fails. Yeah. Let's just continue and finish it, and we get that error. We're going through it once again, and then see that if I go back to SQL Server Management Studio and I run it, everything is rolled back due to the isolation, test isolation as it's called, of the test runner. Yeah, and I can rerun my test, I can run my scripts again, and that's a big advantage of using SQL scripts to go through it. By the way, to find the error, that's the last part to the debugging, and then we go to validating the tests. Let's see, yeah, this is stopped, so it's finished. So I'm going to run through it again to really find the error. So let's run this test. The debugger pops up, and apparently the error is when it's going to verify it, as it doesn't find an an extended text. As we saw, it creates the item, yes, and if I rerun my queries here, I have an item. It has an extended text header, and it has an extended text line, as you can see. Yeah, so it's there. That's set up right. So back here, I'm going to create that assembly order, which might still not show up straight away here, as you can see. And then it's going to add that item to an assembly line. So let's step into this and get the assembly header, open the assembly order page to edit, get the assembly header record, and set on the lines a value, being first the type. It needs to be an item, the type, and now it's going to, as a user, it's kind of mimicking the user, it's going to set the item number of the new item. As you can see, if I hover over, it's that new item, and it's going to set that as if the user fills in that control and validates it. So if I step in, I get into this code here, and I'm here on the assembly line table. Well, if I step out here and step in again, I'll get into this assembly order subform, and yes, it's going to do a lot. Eventually there is a subscriber here as part of the app assembly order subform on after validate. Yeah, and the on after validate has implemented, and that's let's say parallel to how it's implemented on sales, purchase, and service documents. Here is the insert extended text feature called. Yeah, so if I step into this one, and then I get on before insert extended text, there is a publisher here, and I have, hey, wait, oh, sorry, no, I need to get into this, sorry. So here, I'm going to do this one, and it's going to get into the code. It should get into the, no, it doesn't. Well, I was aware of this one because with publishers you always get a little bit easily over something. So what I'm going to do right now, let's run it once again. And actually I had prepared it, but I removed it. Let's put a stop here in the code. So here in this code, oh, sorry, here in the code, this is the code which is going to do the whole thing. So let's put a stop here to easily right now. I know where the error is, but normally I need to run it again. And we all know debugging is sometimes a tedious task to do. So let's run this one again, get into the debugger. Now I do just continue, and it should stop here. Yeah. And what happens here is that I'll find out that I'm here item type, and actually it's, wait, it should get here again. Yeah, once again. So I'm getting into this one item type. Oh, what's happening? Ah, this is Murphy. This should have been right. Yeah, this is funny, but nevertheless, the bug. Let's run it one time again. I don't know why it stepped over. Apparently Murphy is always sitting on the chair next to me, so sorry for that. But what I wanted to show, and I'll show you also what is wrong in this code. As you can see, it should actually take from the item, as here from the resource, whether it should use the automatic test, and this is putting in the value false. I don't know why I stepped over it somewhat. I got wrong this, but this is an error here. So it should have used the this similar thing from the item. Yeah, that's the wrong thing. Nevertheless, one thing I want to show you here, and let's say I've never been more a friend to the call stack since that I have started with test automation. The call stack is a very valuable tool or feature in the debugger. Actually, if I'm hitting an error, where do I come from? Well, the bottom part is the test tool or the test runner. Yeah, I don't need to mind about all this code. By the way, it's not showing here. This part is my test code. Yeah, and this is also part of my test code. App code will be always on top of that. Yeah, so if I'm here, I'm in app code, I can easily go and have a look. Okay, what is the context? Oh, so I'm from this action. Data has been set up and this is the action done. Yeah, and the action leads to the code here. So getting back to the slides, I have a kind of resume on that call stack. So the call stack is actually showing me at the bottom always, let's say the test runner, the test tool part. On top of that, always the test code. Where am I? Where did I trigger where I ended up? That's the test code, setting up a scenario, and it will then eventually get into the app code. Yeah, it might be that you're in test code and there's no app code at the top because you're just executing the test code at that moment, but you get then into the app code. It's always this structure, and it helps me to easily jump between, okay, I'm now in app code. Okay, where do I come from? Okay, I created data. Hey, maybe I forgot to create some extra data in my tests. It's not always that when something goes wrong, it's the app that goes wrong. It might be your test. Yeah. So call stack is your best friend when you're debugging your test code. Okay, looking at time, let's move on. Validating your tests. And this will be a bit shorter than in the course because I showed how I use the SQL queries. If you have a successful test, how do you know it's successful? How can I test the test? Yeah. And in the book, if you have the book, you might have read it too. I also use this at the end of every example. How can you test your test and see indeed that it's a meaningful test? There are two parts to that. One is check the data that is being created. Just let your test run and go into the application and see if the data is there. Either really in the data, in the application, or so that the data sticks there, or using SQL queries. And the other one is other simple one is change something simple in your test code and run it again and see if it still is successful. In general, it will err. I will explain a little bit, of course, demo that. So let's go and have a look at this. There are two options here. Either you run your tests outside of test isolation, and then when the test is finished, you can go in the application and have a look at it. Or like I just showed, run the debugger, run a debug session and use SQL queries to show that. There is another option to that. You could also still open in another browser tab a page and have a look at that. I'll show all of them. So let's go first into this one. And I've set up a separate Docker container. So I'm going to first of all end this debug session. Let's revert this to what it was. So let's stop the whole debugger session. I'm going to deploy. I did already deploy the app into that other Docker environment, but I'm going to deploy my tests to that other Docker environment. So here, that's this one. It should have been freshly set up. I recall, but sometimes I do things parallel and I'm not fully in sync with what I thought I would be. So it's going to open up the test tool again, installing my test extension. By the way, triggering an install code unit that does install or set up a whole test suite with all tests in it. As my test suite with that single test is called a demo that will always pop up. The first in the alphabetically order of test suites will show up. By the way, no questions so far? No? So,
sorry, I couldn't find the mute button. Yeah, no questions so far.
Yeah, okay, great. Oh yeah, this is a new environment, so the demo test suite is not there. So I could run all tests. This is inside or with isolation. So let's change it and select another test runner. And this is a standard test runner which has isolation disabled. Yeah. So anything I run right now will now create data in the database. I'll show you. In this database, if I open up the items, you will find not an item called GL00 whatever. Yeah? If I open up the number series, you will also see there will be not a number series GLGU. Yeah? So there is not an item GL, should not be an item GL00 as you see. Yeah? If I go to the assembly orders, for example, there is no assembly order in the system. Yeah. If I open up, as I said, number series, you will find that there is no number series starting with GL or GU, as you can see. Yeah. So, but as soon as I run my tests, they will be there because there is no isolation, so nothing is rolled back at the end of the test. Let's take an assembly. I think this one was still with the error in it, so let's run it. We will see probably this is still holding the error as I also deployed it here with the error in it. Waking up, warming up, so assembly, that error will, with the item, will always happen. If I do this with the resource on the order, so extended text assembly order resource, yeah. By the way, the error will roll back all things, so that is a standard rollback. Let's run this one and see what happens with, for example, number series. And then you will see we have here a number series global and GUID that's created and sticks in the database. Yeah. If I'm going, though, I opened up the items, but now I need to use the resources just because I get an error on the items because of the errors there. But there's a resource, GL, etc. Yeah. So this is a way of checking your tests. Do they create the data I'm expecting? Yeah. So that's, let's say, the first scenario, and that's, let's say, my demo on that one. Run a test code unit. You could also create an action on a page and run the test code unit. I took this example. I selected the test runner with isolation disabled and ran my tests. Yeah, that's the one. The other one is actually, and that's my preferable one, is running a debug session. Run the tests within test isolation, like I also showed in my debug session already, and use SQL queries to see how the data is being created. Let's rerun that scenario once again. So that's in the other environment. I have this test runner with isolation level set, and I'm going to pick here this suite, which is exactly the same. I have the same error, but let's take, well, we could take that example too. Well, let's fix it. Let's fix the code here so that it will be successful. So here, item. Okay, let's build and deploy this to this environment. And this is the environment where I'll use in the test runner that isolation level here. And let's run, this is the single test. That should now be successful. Wait, why doesn't it, wait, sorry. It should be this test, but I don't know why it didn't select the other one. So this is now successful. Yeah. If I run a debug session, I could go and debug in a similar way. If it doesn't take too long to pop up, I can easily show you again, and then I'll move to the last part. Maybe it takes a bit too long. Okay, now here. So here, this one should now again pop up the debugger, and I could go through it step by step like I did show you with the previous part and run my queries to see the data created. Yes, so I'm not going to repeat the full run through. So let's stop the, oh no, before I stop, let's show this one, and the blog link to James Pearson's blog shows you or describes that exactly. Let's open up here the same client in another web page, web tab, and go to items. I should now be able to see that the item GL00 whatever has been created, as you can see here. Yeah, oh sorry, here it is. Yeah, but if I continue, it will be gone again because of the isolation. Yeah, so let's refresh it. Oh, wait, this is funny. Oh, wait, sorry. There's this breakpoint. Let's get it done. Yeah, so it's gone. Yeah, so that's the other option of opening relevant pages. Note that SQL Server option is only possible in an on-prem or containerized installation. In SaaS, you will not be able to access it. As a last part, and yes, well, I think we're nicely on time. Another way of verifying your test is not debugging anything, but is changing your test. So let's get rid of this breakpoint, by the way, and get to the code. Let's stop the debug session also. Should go. And that's this one. If you have a rightly set up test, there's always at least a one then part. There probably will be multiple parts because it's not one thing you need to check. If there are a ledger entry created, you want to know the amount, if it's open, I don't know what, all kind of things. So you're checking various things. Well, one of the things we're checking here or need for our check is the item number that is created. Well, if this is the expected item number, and if I go to the code here, is maybe not checking the item number as such, but it's using the item number to set a filter here on the text lines. Yes. So what I could do is just change this into a probably not so obvious value, your name or whatever you want to do. Yes, so if we pick this one and see what happens if we just put in a, let's say, a random value. It's not a real random value, but not a very obvious one, and then run the test with that. What happens with the test? The test was successful. Yeah, so I had a successful test. What happens if I run it right now? Hey, there's not an extended text header with filter, and the filter, table name, item number, Luc. Yeah, it doesn't find that item. No, sure, it had this specific value that was handed off by this one. You could do the same with assembly. Or if you go into the code, as we ended up here in this library, there is some checking here, assert. You could change also something in the assert. So change the expected value, or, well, you could go by checking or changing more things at this level here of the given or at the when. And you will find out if you change something, if you tweak it actually the wrong way, your test will fail. It's not that it's successful, just successful. I mean, of course, if I remove all code here, this test will be successful. Why? You could say a definition of a successful test is a test that does not fail, which actually is true. A failing test fails because an error is thrown either by the verification or app code triggered, there is an error, a transfer field, a test field or a field error function triggered. If a test does not trigger an error, field error, test field, or other way of errors, it's a successful test. That's what it is. So if there's no code in it, there's no error. But okay, you set up a valid scenario, you programmed it, it doesn't fail. All right, that's actually it. So there's room for questions if people did type them or if they still want to type. And maybe David, you have a question.
No questions so far. It's when you first started this sequel, I didn't understand why you had read uncommitted, and you only explained that really towards the end. So I just wanted to, you know what I mean? It was right at the end when you mentioned that. Now I think it was really important because obviously if you do use the SQL, yeah, keep going.
Yep.
Yeah. So I thought, what I thought was you're using a different version of SQL Server Management Studio that automatically put that in, and then I realized, of course, you type that in. So you just emphasize, just clear, I think, for anyone that didn't spot that.
Thanks for
that. That's really critical. Otherwise, none of this will happen. So
True.
The problem is because that was off the screen and most of them you couldn't see it, people are normally going to go table select top 1000 as and miss that out. So really, really important. Without the read committed, none of this would have worked.
Yeah, when I created the first query, the rest I already had prepared, I did add that to it. But yes, it's good that you, let's say, re-emphasize that part. It's really important. If you don't have that and you run your queries, they never stop. So you will see that the stop button is turned red and that nothing shows up, and underneath it says it's executing query. But you need to get this in. Yeah, true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the only thing. I mean, I always debugging it's interesting that debugging the test code is actually probably more work than debugging the actual code, right?
Often when you're building your test, surely it is, and of course, if you have a failing test, you have to go through the test code, and you have to probably also step through the app code. So there's more to it. On the other hand, you have a scenario that was successful, so you have a context. If you were the programmer or you're in the known of the feature, you know what should be happening there. So it's what I always call test and app code is this ladder, two sides of the ladder, and if you move up, both are with you. But yes, you finding the cause of a failing test will take a little bit more code to go through. On the other hand, if you're building tests, you will find out, and it was not a topic of today, that eventually you will be debugging less than ever because your tests are already checking your app code. So if your test is failing, you need to fix something, but then they're in balance, and debugging is often then not needed. You just run your tests again.
Okay, yeah. By the way, Slavomir says that you can disable enabled buffering insert on the service tier, which will track the inserts a lot better. That's another note that probably before, if you do this presentation again, do those two things first. It'll show how to go and set it up in the service tier, because that makes really good sense. And don't forget the read uncommitted. So Slavomir, thanks. It's a good note, good point. Yeah, I was one other thing which I was a little bit unclear is this process you've gone through now, is this one-off that you do at the beginning when you are debugging your actual test scenarios, which once the test scenarios are debugged, is that finished? Or you also use this same process when the code breaks and you want to debug the actual code? So in other words, are you using the debugger in the test environment to also debug the breaking change? Or is it only just at the very beginning to get the test cases to work?
If overall, both cases. With having test automation, you will probably have lesser to debug later on. You have lesser bugs in general also, but in general, yeah, I use this way of working in both cases.
Yeah, so this is something that once you put it in place, you're still going to be using it for every month when there's any time a breaking change comes in, you've got to still use this process. It's not a one-off at the beginning and then forget it. It's going to be there regularly used, right?
Yeah.
Good idea for a service to provide that to someone. Anyway.
Yeah.
Good. That was great. You opened my eyes. I would never have thought of debugging the debugging tools.
Yes, we're getting to the end.
Yep. No more questions by the looks of it? No, looks like we're good.
Yeah, thanks all for being here. And we're going to wrap up. So I'm going to, I'm on the control side to stop the recording. Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Great presentation, Luc. Thank you.
You're welcome.